My husband cheated in the bathtub with our neighbor, but my son smirked. You deserve it. So I locked the door and opened my future. I walked into the house expecting quiet and found water running and laughter echoing down the hall. A sound so out of place it made my stomach tighten before my mind caught up, and when I pushed open the bathroom door, I saw my husband Gordon, 68 and graying, sunk in the tub with our neighbor, Tanya, 60 years old and smiling like she had won something, their bare shoulders slick with soap, their faces flushed with a familiarity that did not belong to me anymore, and the shock snapped into heat as I heard my own voice rise, telling them they were old enough to know better than to do something so disgusting in my home, in my life, in the space I had paid for with decades of steadiness. And before Gordon could speak, Eric appeared behind me, my son, grown and tall and hard-eyed, and he shoved me backward with one flat palm to my chest, as if moving a chair, not his mother, and he said, "Mom, you deserve it. You have been ruining people's lives forever." And Tanya laughed softly, a thin sound that scraped, and said I thought I was some kind of saint when I was really just a faded shadow clinging to a house that did not want me. And Gordon finally spoke with a calm that cut deeper than shouting, telling me he was tired of living with someone who always had to be right, someone who made every choice feel like a trial, someone who watched and remembered and never let things slide. And I understood then that the cruelty was practiced, that they had rehearsed these lines long before the water ever filled the tub. I did not scream again, because something steadied in me, and I reached out and pulled the bathroom door closed and turned the lock from the outside, not as violence, but as a line drawn, a statement that my presence still mattered. And from behind the door I heard Gordon curse and Tanya hiss, and Eric leaned close to the wood and murmured to her that the plan was still running and that I would crack soon enough. And the word plan rang in my ears with a clarity that pushed the shock aside, because this was not only betrayal but bait, a scene designed to provoke, to film, to frame me as unstable. And I felt the old habit return, the one that counted details and followed threads, and somewhere around then, as the truth sharpened, I want to pause and speak to you listening now, because if you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening, because what came next was not the end, but the beginning. It was an old lock, the kind that jammed easily, and I heard it catch the moment I turned it. I stepped back from the door and let the house go quiet, and in that quiet I reached into my coat and took out the second phone I kept for emergencies, an old habit from a life spent knowing how easily narratives can be twisted. And I set it to record, holding it steady as I listened to Tanya laugh and say that if I lost my temper, they could finally close the file, and Eric answer that the doctor would do the rest once I looked emotional enough, and Gordon say he would handle the signatures because I always trusted him, and each word landed clean and sharp, proof forming itself without my interference. And the shock drained away completely, replaced by a focus that surprised me with its calm. I thought about how easily they had said you deserve it, as if punishment were owed for a lifetime of saying no, when no was the only honest answer. And I thought about how many times they had tried to provoke me lately, how often Eric had mentioned my age, how Tanya had asked questions about my routines with a smile too interested, and the pieces slid together with the certainty of a ledger balanced at last. I did not call a locksmith or the police or anyone who would turn this into noise before it needed to be, because noise was what they wanted from me, and instead I kept recording and let them talk themselves into clarity, and when they finally went quiet, I turned off the phone and pressed it to my palm, feeling the small warmth of it, feeling my own breathing slow, and I told myself that they wanted me to lose control so they could take it all, and that I would give them something else entirely, because I was 73 years old and still capable of choosing the moment to speak. And standing there in my hallway, I understood that locking that door had not trapped them, it had freed me, and I promised myself that I would show them exactly how clear my mind still was, and that promise settled into me like a fact, not a threat, as steady and unmovable as anything I had ever known. Standing alone after that bathroom door closed, I finally let myself trace it back to where it truly began. Not with Tanya, not with the tub, but with my refusal to be careless. I spent most of my working life as a compliance-focused accountant for community funds and school programs. The kind of job that requires memory, documentation, and the quiet courage to say no when everyone else prefers convenience. And I kept records because records protect people, but Gordon called it paranoia. Eric learned to roll his eyes at the folders and labeled envelopes, and slowly the narrative formed that I was difficult, suspicious, always looking for problems instead of letting life flow. The truth was simpler and crueler. My attention made their shortcuts visible, and they resented being seen. Years ago, while auditing a small community grant tied to a local youth program, I uncovered irregularities that pointed to misuse of funds and inappropriate behavior that crossed ethical lines, and I reported it because I believed silence makes accomplices. But the fallout was ugly, families whispered, donors pulled back, and Gordon complained endlessly that I had embarrassed him, telling Eric that his mother liked destroying people's lives more than protecting her own family, and Eric grew up hearing that lesson repeated until it sounded like fact. When people avoided us afterward, when invitations dried up, Gordon blamed my honesty instead of the wrongdoing itself, and Eric absorbed the idea that my integrity was a liability, not a value. By the time he was old enough to understand resentment, he had learned to aim it at me. When Eric was 19, restless and convinced success was something you grabbed loudly, he came to me with a plan to borrow money to open a bar with friends who had enthusiasm but no experience, and to invest the rest in a volatile cryptocurrency scheme he barely understood. And he wanted my signature as a co-guarantor because my credit was solid and my savings represented safety, and I read every document, ran the numbers, and said no because the risk was obvious and the losses would be permanent. And Eric's anger exploded in a way that shocked me then and makes sense now, because to him, my refusal was not protection but betrayal. When the venture collapsed months later, when his friends scattered and the money vanished, he told anyone who would listen that I had stolen his future, that my fear had kept him small, and Gordon did nothing to correct him because Gordon had always been quietly threatened by the stability I brought. A man younger than me who depended on my planning while resenting it, calling my boundaries control because it was easier than admitting his own insecurity. Gordon liked to say he wanted freedom, but what he wanted was the benefit of structure without the discomfort of accountability, and my presence made that contradiction impossible to ignore. Over time, every sensible choice I made became evidence in their private case against me. Every warning reframed as nagging, every saved receipt proof that I did not trust them, and they bonded over the story of my supposed tyranny, a story that let them feel justified in ignoring my advice and angry when consequences followed. Tanya entered that environment like someone who knew exactly where to press, friendly at first, asking about schedules, habits, the way I organized household finances, complimenting my memory while quietly mapping it. And when I gently corrected her about neighborhood rules, parking violations, and noise complaints because those rules protected property values and people's peace, she smiled and nodded, and later complained that I thought I owned the street, that I was an old woman who needed to be put in her place. I did not know then how neatly my family's resentment would align with her ambition, how easily my reputation as difficult would make their betrayal sound believable, how my insistence on fairness would be used to frame me as unstable. Looking back, I see how every conflict followed the same pattern. When my caution prevented harm, they called it control. When my honesty exposed wrongdoing, they called it cruelty. When my refusal blocked their risky dreams, they called it sabotage. And when my memory preserved facts they preferred to forget, they called it obsession. It was a perfect double standard, because if I stayed silent and cleaned up the mess, I was enabling, and if I spoke up to stop it, I was the villain. They did not hate me because I failed them. They hated me because I would not fail myself in order to make their lives easier. Standing there, with proof warming my palm, I finally understood that the bathtub betrayal was only the loudest symptom of a much older disease, one built from years of resentment toward a woman who would not be careless, would not sign blindly, would not look away, and would not pretend that love meant letting people hurt themselves without objection. I did not lose my family because I was cold or controlling. I lost them because I refused to be useful to their worst impulses. And that realization hurt more than any insult they threw at me, but it also clarified something essential. Their hatred was not evidence of my failure. It was evidence of my boundaries holding firm. And once I saw that, I stopped wondering how to earn their approval and started planning how to protect my future. After I locked the bathroom door from the outside, the laughter did not stop right away, and that was the first thing that told me this scene was never meant to end with shame or apology. It was meant to provoke, to push me into noise they could later label as instability. I stood there, my palm still on the cool metal of the knob, listening as the water sloshed and the air filled with the careless confidence of people who believed they had already won. And then the words came, low at first, then clearer as they forgot I could hear them. Eric's voice cut through the steam with the calm of someone discussing logistics, not betrayal, and he said that the doctor would only need to note an emotional outburst and the paperwork would take care of itself. And Tanya laughed and asked what they would do about signatures because old women never sign when they are cornered. And Gordon answered with a shrug in his voice that he would handle it, that all they needed was for me to look out of control for a few days. I felt something cold and precise settle in my chest, because that was the moment the bathtub stopped being a shock and became evidence. I did not scream. I did not pound on the door. I stood very still and let them keep talking, because people reveal the truth fastest when they think the story is already written. Eric said they had been careful lately, that they kept reminding me about missed appointments and misplaced keys, and Tanya joked that the little videos helped, that a clip here and there of me reacting to nonsense could be edited into something convincing, and Gordon told them to stop worrying, because judges believed patterns, not explanations. As I listened, memories rearranged themselves with brutal clarity. The recent weeks of comments about my memory, the deliberate interruptions, the small provocations meant to spark irritation, the way Eric would raise his phone whenever I objected to something, pretending to check messages while angling the camera toward my face. I had thought it was disrespect, but it was preparation, a slow construction of a version of me they needed the world to accept. When the water finally stopped and their voices moved farther from the door, I stepped away quietly and went to the study, the place they never bothered to tidy because they believed I was the only one who cared what papers said. My hands did not shake as I opened the desk drawer, because my mind was already cataloging, and there it was beneath a stack of mail, a printed draft titled Durable Power of Attorney with my name typed neatly in the wrong font, as if formality could disguise intention. I flipped the pages and saw Gordon listed as primary agent, Eric as successor, and language about incapacity that read like a verdict waiting for a date, and tucked behind it was a folder with an appointment confirmation for a cognitive evaluation scheduled without my consent, the kind that becomes a weapon when paired with the right narrative. I sat down slowly, feeling the chair support me as if it understood the weight of what I was holding, and I let myself remember every time they had baited me recently, every careless insult, every reminder that I was 73 and therefore, in their minds, optional. I checked the computer and found an open email thread Tanya had forgotten to close, a conversation with Gordon discussing the timing of the evaluation and the need to catch me on a bad day. And there was even a note about the Colorado house, about how once authority shifted, decisions could be streamlined, property leveraged, retirement accounts simplified, words that turned my life into an asset list. I did not feel panic then. I felt confirmation, because nothing steadies you like realizing your fear has a shape and a plan, and plans can be interrupted. I returned to the hallway and listened again, letting my phone record as they complained about the lock and joked that I would calm down eventually, that women like me always did once the world told them they were wrong often enough. Eric said I had always loved being right more than being pleasant, and Tanya replied that pleasant women were easier to manage, and Gordon said it was time I learned to let go. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes, not to escape but to focus, because the truth was no longer scattered. It was lined up neatly like figures in a ledger, and every entry pointed to the same conclusion. The affair was not a lapse of desire. It was a stage prop, the kind designed to humiliate and destabilize, to provoke a reaction they could capture and convert into authority. They wanted me loud, disoriented, emotional, anything but composed, because composure ruins their story. I walked back into the study and placed the documents in a folder of my own, sliding it into a drawer I knew how to lock, and I whispered to myself that I had not survived decades of audits, conflicts, and uncomfortable truths to be undone by a bathtub and a script. The laughter behind the door faded into whispers, then into nothing, and I stood there, with evidence in my hands and clarity in my head, understanding at last that the trap was not sprung by sex or betrayal, but by their belief that I would unravel on cue, and I decided then that if they wanted a performance, I would give them one they could not control, because the truth, once gathered, has a way of turning every laugh into an echo of regret. I did not confront them after what I heard, because confrontation was exactly what they wanted, a flare of emotion they could later point to and label as proof. So instead, I did something far more dangerous to their plan. I became smaller on the surface and sharper underneath. I let my shoulders droop when Eric walked past me, let my voice soften when Gordon spoke, answered Tanya's jabs with tired nods, and watched the relief bloom on their faces as they mistook compliance for collapse. Inside, however, I was working with the same discipline that had carried me through decades of balancing ledgers and untangling other people's messes, because futures are not opened with anger, they are opened with preparation. I started by copying everything that mattered: the deed to the house, the original purchase documents, the mortgage satisfaction letter from years ago, the insurance policies, my retirement account statements, and every beneficiary designation I could find, scanning them quietly at the library and saving them to a secure cloud folder Eric did not know existed. At night, I photographed calendars, appointment cards, and the draft power of attorney papers, making sure dates and file names told a clear story, and I recorded every conversation in common spaces, not secretly out of malice but carefully out of necessity, because memory alone is fragile and recordings are not. When Gordon complained that I was forgetting things again, when Tanya suggested I rest instead of asking questions, when Eric spoke slowly to me as if I were a child, all of it went into a growing archive that documented tone as much as words. I reached out quietly to people who still knew who I was, starting with an elder law attorney recommended by a friend from my volunteer days, a woman who listened without interrupting and told me, very calmly, that nothing I described was unusual, and that preparation was my strongest ally. I also called a retired banker I had once helped through a messy audit years ago, someone who understood how easily signatures and timing could be abused, and I asked him what to watch for if someone wanted to extract value from a house quickly, and he told me to check for liens, credit inquiries, and refinance activity. Armed with that, I logged into accounts I had not reviewed closely in months and found the first crack in their story: a notification buried in spam about a credit check tied to the property, something I had never authorized. My heart did not race, it narrowed, because that was the moment suspicion hardened into certainty. I pulled a recent credit report and saw the inquiry linked to a home equity line of credit application. And when I followed the trail through the county records, I found a preliminary notice filed under Gordon's name, using marital authority language that assumed I was already sidelined. Eric's email appeared on the contact line for follow-up, neat and confident, as if he were ordering supplies instead of dismantling my life. They were not waiting for a diagnosis to take effect. They were acting as if it already had, moving money before anyone could ask whether they should. I printed everything and added it to my folder, noting timestamps and cross-references, because patterns matter and coincidences are rarely accidental. When Gordon mentioned casually that refinancing rates were good right now, I smiled and said I was glad he was thinking ahead. And when Tanya joked that houses were just assets meant to be leveraged, I agreed in a voice so mild it made her relax. And all the while I documented the way they spoke about my home as if it were already theirs. I visited the county clerk under the pretense of replacing a misplaced document and asked careful questions about recent filings, confirming that nothing was finalized yet but that momentum was building, the kind that relies on silence to succeed. Back at home, I changed passwords they had never bothered to learn because they assumed age equaled incompetence, and I set alerts on every account, choosing notifications loud enough to wake me if needed, because nothing interrupts a quiet theft like light. I also invited a neighbor I trusted for coffee, someone neutral who had no stake in our family drama, and I talked openly about my concerns, asking her to remember dates and conversations, to be a witness if memory were ever challenged, because truth travels better with company. Each small step felt ordinary, almost boring, and that was the point, because there is nothing theatrical about reclaiming control. It looks like paperwork and patience, and waiting until the other side reveals how far they have already gone. By the time Gordon and Eric began arguing softly about timing and approvals, thinking I was asleep, I had already mapped their route and noted every turn. And when I heard Eric say that they should move faster before I changed my mind, I smiled into the dark because I had already changed everything that mattered. They thought the future was something they could unlock with a signature and a diagnosis. But what they did not understand was that futures are not opened by taking. They are opened by knowing, and I knew exactly what they were trying to do, how they planned to do it, and who they intended to leave behind. And for the first time since the bathroom door closed, I felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who has just balanced the books and realized the numbers no longer belong to the liars. They chose a Sunday afternoon for what Eric called a family meeting, as if adding that word could bleach the intent out of what they were about to do. Gordon sat at the head of the dining table with his hands folded, practicing a look that was meant to signal concern but carried no warmth, only impatience. Eric leaned against the counter, scrolling on his phone, already bored, already certain of the outcome. Tanya arrived last, uninvited but expected, carrying a small bag of bath products like a prop in a play she believed she had already won. I took my seat slowly, lowering myself as if my joints protested more than they did, letting them believe the version of me they preferred. Gordon cleared his throat and spoke in a careful voice, the kind people use when they think they are being kind. "Michelle, we have been worried about you," he said. "You have been stressed, confused. It might be time for you to rest and let others handle things." Eric nodded without looking up. "Yeah, Mom, you have done enough. Let me take care of it now." The words were soft, but the message underneath was sharp. "Step aside." Tanya smiled and moved closer, placing the bag on the table. "I just want to help," she said sweetly. "I can help you bathe, make sure you do not forget things. You know how that happens." Her eyes flicked to Eric, seeking approval, and he gave her a small grin. I lowered my gaze and said nothing, letting the silence stretch until Gordon filled it with irritation. "There are some papers," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "Just signatures, nothing complicated. We do not want to make this harder than it needs to be." I opened the folder slowly, already knowing what was inside, and pretended to squint at the pages. "What is this again?" I asked. Eric sighed loudly. "Mom, we went over this. It is just so I can help manage things. You trust me, right?" Then he said the line he had been saving, the one he believed would end the conversation. "You are 73. Nobody is going to pick you over your own son." The cruelty of it landed hard, but I kept my face blank, my voice soft. "I cannot hear very well today," I said. "Could you come closer?" Tanya stepped in eagerly, bending down so close I could smell her perfume. "It is simple," she whispered, impatient now. "You sign, and then you move into assisted living. The house gets sold, the money gets transferred. Whether you want it or not, this is happening." Gordon did not correct her. Eric did not flinch. In fact, Eric leaned forward and added, his voice low and sharp, "You deserve it, Mom. After all the years you said no to me." The words burned, but they were exactly what I needed. I nodded slowly, as if absorbing it with difficulty, and asked again, "What was that?" Tanya laughed, careless, triumphant. I said, "This is better for everyone. You cannot live here anymore." Outside, the doorbell camera blinked silently, capturing every raised voice, every sneer, while the recorder in my pocket hummed steadily, collecting their confidence like a debt. Gordon pushed the pen toward me. "Sign it," he said flatly. "Do not make a scene." I looked at the page, then at him, then at Eric, and finally at Tanya, who had already begun talking about contractors and timelines as if my decision were a formality. After the sale, she said, we can finally start fresh. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made Eric relax and Tanya straighten, convinced they were seconds from victory. All right, I said, if that is what you all want. Eric exhaled in relief. See? That was not so hard. I did not pick up the pen. Instead, I reached into my pocket and set my phone on the table, screen lit, recording still running, and I said, very clearly, I just wanted to make sure I heard you correctly. The room went still. Tanya's smile faltered first. Eric's eyes dropped to the phone, then snapped back up to my face. Gordon's hand froze in midair. What is that? He asked. A witness, I said calmly, and so is the camera on the door. And so is the neighbor, who has been listening since you started telling me where I was going to live. Eric laughed nervously. You cannot do anything with that. Tanya scoffed, trying to recover. No one will believe you. I leaned back in my chair, feeling steadier than I had in weeks. You are right, I said softly. I cannot do anything. You already did it for me. The arrogance drained from their faces one by one as the weight of their own words settled in the air. And for the first time since the bathroom door had closed, I saw uncertainty flicker where certainty had lived. Because confidence is powerful until it realizes it has been heard. I did not sleep that night. But not because I was afraid. Fear had already burned itself out. What kept me awake was clarity. I waited until the house was quiet, until Gordon's breathing slowed into the heavy rhythm of someone who believed tomorrow belonged to him. Then I got up, moved through the rooms I had kept running for decades, and began doing what I had always done best when things fell apart. I organized, I documented, and I acted. By dawn, I had already scheduled a locksmith, not as an act of spite, but as an assertion of fact. The house was mine, purchased before my marriage, refinanced only in my name, the deed clean and unambiguous. Locking the door was not revenge, it was accuracy. When the locksmith arrived, I stood beside him, calm, present, signing the work order with a steady hand. As the locks clicked into place, something inside me clicked too. This was what it meant to open my future. Quietly, legally, irrevocably. I spent the morning making changes Gordon and Eric never thought I was capable of making without them. I opened a new account at a different bank, moved my pension deposits, redirected my Social Security, and froze any joint access with a single phone call. I scanned every document that mattered, uploaded them to a secure vault, and handed physical copies to my attorney, a woman who listened without interrupting and nodded as if every piece of this made perfect sense. We updated my will. We established a trust. We named beneficiaries who did not smirk at my pain. I did not cry while doing any of it. Grief had already done its worst. What remained was resolve. By afternoon, Gordon realized something was wrong. He tried his key. It did not turn. He knocked, then pounded, then shouted my name as if volume could undo law. I did not answer. I watched from the hallway as he called Eric, his voice rising, his certainty cracking. An hour later, Eric showed up with 2 police officers wearing concern like a costume. My mother is unstable, he said loudly enough for me to hear through the door. She locked us out. She has been acting irrationally. I am worried about her safety. I opened the door myself, slowly, and stepped onto the porch. I greeted the officers by name because my attorney had already called ahead. I handed them copies of the deed, the recordings, the messages where Eric and Gordon planned my removal. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I simply stated facts. One of the officers listened to a clip through his radio earpiece, his expression changing with each sentence. Another asked Gordon to step aside. Gordon tried to argue, but the words tangled, losing their authority the moment they left his mouth. Sir, the officer said calmly, this property belongs to your wife. She has the right to restrict access. Gordon looked at me as if I had become a stranger. Michelle, he said, you cannot do this. I met his eyes and answered evenly. I already did. Eric tried one last time. She is confused, he insisted. She is not thinking clearly. The officer turned to me. Ma'am, are you under any distress? Do you feel threatened? I shook my head. No, I said. I feel finished. That was enough. Gordon was told to collect essential items, later under supervision. Eric was warned about filing false reports. They stood on the sidewalk, stunned, as the door closed behind me, the new lock turning with a final, unmistakable sound. That night, alone in my house for the first time in years, I walked from room to room and felt something unfamiliar. Space. Not emptiness, but space to breathe without bracing for someone else's entitlement. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to the quiet. Locking the door had not trapped me inside. It had kept something corrosive out. I realized then that the future does not announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives with a click, a signature, and the simple truth that you no longer have to ask permission to exist in your own life. They called it a mediation meeting, but everyone in that room knew it was a reckoning. We sat around a long table in a glass-walled conference room downtown, neutral ground chosen by the attorneys, the kind of place meant to feel professional and calm while people's lives quietly cracked apart. My lawyer sat beside me, a banker from my institution joined by video, a notary, and an investigator from Adult Protective Services who had reviewed my complaint. Across from me were Gordon, Eric, and Tanya. They looked smaller than they had in my kitchen, less certain. But Eric still wore that familiar smirk, the one he used when he believed confidence could substitute for truth. He leaned back in his chair and said loudly, "If Mom has evidence, let her show it. Anyone can make stories. Who's going to believe her?" Tanya dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, already rehearsed. "I was just comforting Gordon," she said softly. "Michelle has always misunderstood me. I never meant to hurt anyone." Gordon said nothing at first, but his jaw tightened the way it always did when he thought silence made him look dignified. I did not argue. I did not interrupt. I waited. When my attorney nodded, I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. The room shifted, just slightly, the way it does when people sense gravity changing. "You asked for proof," I said evenly. "Here it is." I pressed play. Tanya's voice filled the room first, unmistakable, careless, mocking. "Once she signs, she's out. Assisted living. The house gets sold." Eric's voice followed, colder than I remembered. "She deserves it, after all the years she said no to me." Gordon's came last, tired and cruel. "Just make her look unstable. Doctors will do the rest." No one spoke. The banker frowned. The investigator wrote notes without looking up. Tanya's tissue froze halfway to her face. Eric's smirk collapsed into something brittle and forced. I did not stop there. I slid copies of documents across the table. The HELOC application initiated without my knowledge, the attempted beneficiary change, the refinance inquiry tied to Gordon's email and Eric's phone number. My attorney explained the timeline, precise and unembellished. The banker confirmed the flags their fraud department had already raised. Then I played the doorbell footage, Eric on my porch, raising his voice, threatening to call police to have me removed from my own home. The investigator finally looked up. "This constitutes attempted financial exploitation," she said calmly. The words landed with more force than any insult ever had. Tanya's composure shattered first. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "She manipulated all of you. She's always been controlling." The investigator turned to her. "Ma'am, you are not a party to this marriage or this property, yet your voice appears repeatedly in plans to transfer assets. You are being instructed not to contact Mrs. Collins again." Tanya laughed once, sharp and panicked. "You can't do that." "We can," the investigator replied. "And we are." Gordon finally spoke, his voice low. "Michelle, let's be reasonable. We can work something out." I looked at him, really looked, and felt nothing. "We already did," I said. Eric stood abruptly. "You're really going to do this?" he demanded. "I'm your son." I held his gaze. "And you tried to erase me." The room was silent again. My attorney cleared her throat and summarized the consequences with professional precision. Gordon would vacate the house, the divorce would proceed under unfavorable terms due to misconduct, and he would have no access to my accounts. Tanya would face a civil restraining order and potential charges if forged documents were confirmed. Eric's involvement would be formally recorded, his attempt noted as exploitation, and he would be removed from my will and any future authority over my affairs. That was when Eric's voice broke. Just slightly. "Mom," he said, softer now. "I'm sorry. I didn't think it would go this far." I waited a moment, then answered calmly, "You're not sorry you hurt me. You're sorry you lost." He had no reply. Gordon stared at the table. Tanya looked at the door, as if measuring how fast she could leave. The meeting ended without shouting, without drama, without anything left unresolved. When I stood to go, my hands did not shake. I felt light, not triumphant, but finished. As I walked out of that glass room into the Colorado sunlight, I understood something with perfect clarity. They laughed when they thought I was powerless. They fell silent when they realized I was not, and that silence was worth every long night it took to get there. I moved out quietly, the way you leave a place that no longer deserves a dramatic goodbye. A week after the meeting, after the locks were changed and the lawyers finished their paperwork, I packed only what mattered: papers, photos I actually loved, books with margins full of my handwriting. I did not take the china we never used or the furniture chosen to impress guests who never truly saw me. I chose a small apartment at the edge of a mountain town. Nothing fancy, just a place with a wide window where the light came in honest and unfiltered. Every morning, the mountains remind me that endurance does not need applause. It only needs time. For the first few nights, I slept lightly, not from fear, but from relief. My body was learning what safety felt like again. No footsteps outside my door, no voices testing my patience, no one watching my reactions, waiting for me to slip so they could call it proof. I cooked simple meals. I drank my coffee slowly. I left my phone face up on the table because I no longer had to hide anything. Freedom, I learned, is quiet. I joined a small support group at the community center. Women my age and older, all of us carrying different versions of the same betrayal. Some had children who drained their accounts. Some had husbands who signed things behind their backs. We did not cry much. We talked about documents, boundaries, warning signs. I told my story, not with bitterness but with clarity, and I watched other women sit up straighter when they realized they were not foolish, not weak, not alone. Helping them did something unexpected for me. It returned a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with fixing my family. I updated my will and my trust with a calm I never thought possible. I removed names that had once felt permanent. I added causes that reflected who I had always been, not who they tried to reduce me to. A portion went to a foundation supporting older women navigating financial abuse. Another went to a local legal aid group that helped me understand my options when everyone else assumed I had none. And the rest, the part that mattered most, I set aside for someone who never tried to own me, my granddaughter, not as a reward, not as leverage, but as a statement. Respect is not inherited, it is earned. She visits me now, just the two of us. We talk about school, about her plans, about the kind of life she wants to build. I do not warn her constantly. I do not control. I listen. When she hugs me goodbye, there is no guilt in it, no confusion, only warmth. That is how love is supposed to feel. As for Gordon, he faded quickly once there was nothing left to take. We communicate only through attorneys, and even that is becoming rare. Eric tried once more, a message asking if we could talk, saying he was under a lot of stress. I read it without anger and without urgency. I did not reply. Not every door needs a final conversation. Some only need to stay closed. People sometimes ask me if I regret not forgiving them, as if forgiveness were the same thing as access. I tell them the truth. I forgave myself for staying too long, for explaining myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me, for believing that love required endurance without dignity. That forgiveness was enough. I walk every afternoon now, slow but steady, along a trail that smells like pine and dust and sun. No one hurries me. No one tells me I am too much or too late or too old. I am exactly where I am meant to be. And when I think back to that night, to the steam on the bathroom mirror and the laughter that was meant to break me, I no longer feel humiliation, I feel clarity. I locked the bathroom door so they would understand one thing. I was not their possession. And when I locked that door, I did not trap myself in the past. I opened the future that had been waiting for me all along. And now, my dear listener, my story comes to rest, but my voice does not. If you have stayed with me to the very end, then you know this was never just about betrayal, or age, or a locked door. It was about dignity. It was about an old woman choosing herself when everyone else decided she was disposable. If this story moved you, reminded you of someone you love, or gave you strength you did not know you needed, then please stay with me. I still have many stories to tell, stories of truth, pain, courage, and quiet justice that deserve to be heard. Before you go, sweetheart, don't forget to subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Your support keeps these voices alive, keeps these memories from being erased, and reminds the world that even at this age, we are not finished. Thank you for listening. I'll be right here, waiting for you next time.